Hello, Lions of Liberty fans, and one great way to start out your day is with a shot of whiskey. But if you're not an alcoholic, the next best way to start your day is with an amazing cup of coffee. And now you can order coffee, delicious coffee, and also support the Lions of Liberty. We have partnered with Anarcho Coffee to create our own brand of coffee known as the Morning Roar. And let me tell you, this coffee is delicious. I am saying that as someone who just drank 2 cups of it before I recorded this pre-roll. So I can tell you, I'm a little hyped up, and I just had some delicious coffee. And I'd like you to be able to start your day the same way. So I want you to head over to lionsofliberty.com/coffee. You get a 10% discount with your very first order. And if you join the Lions of Liberty Pride for $10 or more per month, which you can do over at patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, you will then get a permanent 15% discount on all future orders. And you're going to want future orders after you try this, let me tell you. But first, give it a shot. Head over to lionsofliberty.com/coffee and start your day with a morning roar.
Welcome to the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here's your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty, Marc Claire.
Friends, and welcome back to the 402nd edition of this flagship Lions of Liberty podcast, where you find me every single Monday hosting interviews like you're going to hear today, hosting debates like you heard the last couple weeks. I've gotten a great response for my debate between Marxist professor Dr. Richard Wolff and our friend Anthony Samaroff. We're hoping to do a part 2, and I'm trying to arrange that as we speak. If you missed that one, you're going to want to be sure to tick back in your podcast feed and check that one out. But the fun doesn't stop with me, my friends. No, I have my fellow Lions here with me on the Lions of Liberty podcast feed, including Brian McWilliams every single Wednesday, slapping you upside the head with his ranting and raving about everything comedy, culture, and liberty every single Wednesday on Electric Liberty Land, while John Odermatt wraps things up every Friday with his hard-hitting and inspiring look at the broken criminal justice system on Felony Friday. You get all 3 of these shows every single week, free of charge here at Lions of Liberty. All you gotta do is hit that subscribe button on your podcatcher, however you listen to these shows. And if that's not enough, you can get loads and loads of bonus audio content by joining our Patreon. Joining the Lions of Liberty Pride, you can find more information about that over at patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. For as little as $5 a month, you get loads and loads and loads of great content from your friends here at Lions of Liberty. But enough about us. Let's bring in today's guest. All right, with me now is the host of the frequently mentioned on this show, Freeman Beyond the Wall podcast. He is the former Mance Rayder and the current Pete Raymond. Pete, welcome back. Are you ready to roar, first of all?
Oh, most certainly. What's going on, Mark?
I always ask my guests if they're ready to roar, but for you, I almost glossed over it just because I know you roar. I know you roar 3 days a week on your podcast.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, that's one thing I wanted to ask you about, Pete, because you have been pumping out podcasts. I mean, just left and right, 3 days a week. And, sometimes I stress about just getting my one show out every single Monday here. So what is your secret? What is your secret to pumping out 3 podcasts a week very consistently, as well as, I know you're doing bonus content for your Patreon as well.
It's really weird. Like, I would say a week ago, Monday, I had 2 interviews scheduled. So I knew what my Wednesday was going to be. I just released my Monday. I knew what my Wednesday was going to be. I had no idea what my Friday was going to be. No idea what I was going to release today. And within the span of 48 hours, I had booked 6 interviews.
It's funny how it works.
Yeah, it's just, you're like, okay, I'm going to do a solo episode because I don't really have any interviews scheduled. So, I'll talk about something, horrible that's going on in the world. And all of a sudden, just, one after another, just all these interviews. And like right now, if all of my interviews go good this week, I have interviews through next Friday.
Nice.
So
that's sort of the way that guerrilla podcasting, I guess you might call it, kind of works. You know, you know you're going to have X amount of shows, X amount of days. You can only plan out so far in advance sometimes, and sometimes you try to get ahead, try to book a bunch of guests, and especially when you're first starting out. I mean, this is definitely the case for me when I first started my podcast. Sometimes I just could not get anybody to respond, and I'd be stressing. And then next thing you know, you get 5 emails responding to old requests, and suddenly you have more than you can even handle, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to get ready for all these interviews. So it really is it's a very guerrilla environment in the podcasting world.
Yeah, you know, once you're doing it for a while, you know, once you get into, I'm into, today I released episode, I think it's 261.
And you're going to catch up to me at some point because you're doing 3 a week and I'm doing 1. So you're getting ready to lap me like Steve Rogers in Winter Soldier, lapping the Falcon. On your left.
Yeah. But yeah, it gets to the point where I rarely get turned down now. I got turned down recently by somebody, and it was a pretty big name, and I was kind of disappointed, but you know, the explanation that the person gave me was pretty good. I understood it. I just wish we didn't have to live in a world where, you know, people are like, oh, you had Jeremy R. Hammond on to talk about the research he's done on vaccine injuries, and because you know I appear on Fox, this could damage my reputation or something like that, because you know, and it's just like, all right, that's cool. I mean, I appreciate what you.
If I had to think about the other guests that have been on every show I've been on, I mean, it's just a silly way to look at things.
Yeah, I mean, I try. I get asked to go on a lot of podcasts, and I've gotten to the point now where I check the podcast. You know, I don't really want to go on, you know, some, you know, all, you know, that's going to be leaning more towards, you know, build the wall, you know, race realist kind of thing. Because, you know, some of the podcasts I don't know who they are, but I'll talk to anybody because, you know, you never know you never know who's going to hear it. But yeah, I mean, I understand that, but for that one, for that, using that one as an excuse was just maybe just finding an excuse to, you know, not want to do it.
Gotcha. Well, speaking of talking to other people, as you know, I recently hosted a little debate on this program, something I've been trying to do a little bit more of, between our friend Anthony Samaroff, great libertarian, great speaker, great podcaster, and a gentleman by the name of Dr. Richard Wolff, a Marxist. Some of my commenters would put the economist part in quotes, but I won't go there right now. But I know you were able to listen to that show, so I was wondering, from podcaster to podcaster, can I get your hot take on? I mean, obviously, I have an idea of who you thought won it, but what's your hot take on just, I guess, more of the overall concept of doing this kind of thing where, I guess you could say in some ways I am giving a voice to Marxism. I'm not really too concerned about any of my current listeners sort of flipping the switch, but of just giving, I guess, giving a forum for these ideas to be discussed in a different way.
I don't look at debates as win-lose. I don't think most people aren't debating to win or lose. They should be debating to get their ideas out there. And after listening to that, I don't think Richard Wolff has any ideas at all. I mean, none that I heard. Now he could be a brilliant man, but I saw no evidence of that. I saw a lot of ad hominems. I saw a lot of red herrings. I saw somebody equating, you know, having a job and, you know, having a contract with somebody to work for them and accept a certain amount of money compared to slavery. And that to me is just like it's the kind of argument that I would expect from some 19-year-old purple-haired female college student on Twitter.
From someone starring in a Ben Shapiro video.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was a joke. And I know that I believe that Gene Epstein has a debate scheduled against him.
Yep, at the Soho Forum a little later this year.
Yeah, you know, and I'm going to go see. I saw one already this year. I'm definitely going to see one, the Dave Smith, Nick Sarwark one. I've already booked everything for that, and I'm probably going to go to one in December. But if seriously, it's like it's gotten to the point where it's like I want to go to every Soho Forum, and I just can't do it. You know,
I'm jealous that it's so far away. I really got to plan my next New York trip around one of those.
Well, aren't they doing? Did you go to the West Coast one?
There was one with actually that was a one night that I couldn't make it, but yeah, at least they did do one out here, so that's nice.
Yeah, so hopefully they'll try to do that more out there. But yeah, I mean, I really want to be there for that to see if it's just the same garbage that he put out. I mean, I was furious because on one hand, I was furious because it was really his side was a waste of time. On the other hand, I was happy because that is what I expect from a Marxist. That is the attitude that I expect to come from a Marxist. And I mean, he basically had the attitude where the tone of voice that he had was, I will put you in a gulag. I have no problem putting you in a gulag. So I'm glad that happened. I mean, he made no points that made any sense whatsoever. Anthony did a great job as usual. I was floored. I mean, I was just floored. I was expecting this, intellectual, somebody like Gene or somebody like, God, I don't anything. I was expecting, I wasn't expecting all this anger and just this rage.
He is certainly passionate. I'll definitely give him that. I mean, he was, we were on video too. The video's up on YouTube, and he was visibly, I'm not going to say upset, but visibly getting fired up, I guess you might say. And I got to give it credit to Anthony for not pushing back in the same way. He was very able to stay very calm. I mean, he might be the nicest human on the planet, but he's able to stay very calm and very nice and just listen to what he's saying and take it all in. And I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn just from the approach. To me, me hosting a debate like that on this show, obviously the point isn't to really, obviously, I don't think either of them are going to change their positions, and that has nothing to do with it. But it's amazing, especially living out here in California, how many people do share Dr. Wolf's overall attitude. They might not have the same, breakdown from the exact Marxist point of view, but that I think the left has been so good at invading the culture and making some of these ideas seem normal. And I really want to get to the basis and the root of where they come from. So I'm hoping we can at least some of the people that believe these ideas now and hold them dearly might stumble upon this kind of thing and then hear the perspective of the very nice, calm Anthony Samaroff and maybe think about things a little differently.
Well, I would expect an argument, say, if he would have went and talked about, capitalism historically is in concert with the government. And then he'll start talking about, like some of the sugar companies that went in the 1800s, it went down to Central America and basically enslaved the people down there to work for them. Sure, I'll talk about the horrors of that, calling that capitalism all day. But he's talking about what I've done, where I went to a company and I said, look, this is what I can do. And this is how much I want to make. And then we bartered back and forth. And, I know exactly, I'm lucky enough to know exactly what my output is on a monthly basis. So I can look and see what what the whole labor theory of value, what the company's making and what I'm making. But I signed a contract and I said I would work for this, and I'm fulfilling that contract and they're fulfilling that contract. The check doesn't bounce. So what is the problem?
I really liked Anthony's analogy where it's not really an analogy. It's just an example, really. Like if he hires a plumber, you could say, yes, the plumber, he's exploiting the plumber for his labor and his skill and what have you. But the plumber is equally exploiting Anthony's need for a plumber and his inability to handle the plumbing issues. So like any free exchange, like those who have dove into Misesian economics and Austrian economics, it's the exchange works on both ends, and it's proven by the fact that we make it. And that's really I thought his example was a very plain one that people could really see and understand. So hopefully, I know both of them have offered to come back, and I see no reason not to do it again. I have gotten a lot of responses. A lot of people are unhappy with not the fact that I did it, just, with the take of the guest. But anytime I see a lot of response from something, it doesn't need to be a positive response. It just needs to be a response. And I'm definitely getting a big response from this. So it's encouraging me to seek out the part 2 that both of them have expressed some interest in.
Yeah, be interesting. I'll look forward to it.
Alrighty, and now this is the part where I'm going to warn everyone that we are going to be talking about Game of Thrones in a very, very deep detail in a few minutes, including spoilers of any and every episode that's ever happened. So if for some reason you are someone who is not caught up on Game of Thrones a week after the last episode has aired, I would recommend pausing very, very soon or getting ready to pause. But first, I wanted to ask you one more thing, Pete. And I'm just kind of curious. Obviously, this ties into our Game of Thrones discussion. When I first found your podcast, I had never seen Game of Thrones once. I had never heard of Mance Rayder. I didn't even know you named yourself after a character from a show, or that your, Free Man Beyond the Wall, the name of your show, was named after that. I knew none of this stuff. And we'll get into a little bit more of why you specifically chose that moniker and the title of the podcast. But I'm curious, since you have outed yourself, so to speak, you no longer go by that pseudonym. You call yourself Pete Raymond now. Has anything changed for you in the podcasting world or in your personal life? Are there some people in your life that maybe are now more aware of your podcast than before you had your name out there? Just what are your overall thoughts on what the kind of changes or you might have experienced in the last few months since sort of putting yourself more out there personally?
Not really. I mean, I just think that people
I'm still surrounded by sadists.
Yeah, and I had a couple people say that they were thankful that I wasn't hiding anymore. I think that a couple people took it as if I was using a pseudonym like that, I wasn't really that serious about what I was doing. And considering the episodes that I've put out, even like the first 15 episodes of my podcast, to believe I wasn't serious, I don't get it. But yeah, I mean, that really nothing. I mean, there's been no blowback, no one knocking on my door or anything like that. So
keyword being yet. No one knocking on your door yet. So we'll see.
Don't do that.
That's when you know. That's when you'll know you made it.
Don't do that. I'm heavily armed. I don't want that to happen.
Bad idea, folks.
Are you tired of banging your head against the proverbial wall of politics and getting nowhere toward actually making your life more free? Are you tired of interview podcasts that have the same guests as every other libertarian interview podcast out there? Are you tired of hearing the same news stories that you can hear on the mainstream media? Then you need to listen to The Lava Flow, where we don't do politics and we don't do the major stories that exist only to divide you. We talk about news that affects you and your freedom, and we work to find solutions that can actually help you to be more free. Check us out at thelavaflow.com.
Listen to Weird Libertarians at weirdlibertarians.com. My name is Chris Spangle, and I host a show where we talk about the stories you and your friends are talking about, and then we give you libertarian solutions so you sound smarter when you're talking to your friends. We're going to make you sound like a genius. Tune in now at weirdlibertarians.com.
Are those dry, boring, run-of-the-mill political talk shows putting you to sleep on your commute or at work? Are you ready for some fun?
Look no further. Blast Off with Johnny Rocket is a Seattle-based podcast expressing viewpoints of free markets, voluntary exchange, badass music, wicked banner, and of course, drinking.
The Blast Off doesn't shy from the truth, but always brings the party.
Let's rock and roll, Raylene.
Bring it on, Johnny.
You can check us out at thelaunchpadmedia.com/blastoff.
Again, that's thelaunchpadmedia.com/blastoff.
Launchpad Media. Always launching ideas in your direction.
All right, so this is your final warning, everybody. If you care at all about being spoiled by Game of Thrones spoilers, stop right now. But otherwise, it's time to get right into it. And Pete, I'm just curious, first of all, what first captured you about this show? And why did you decide to choose the moniker of Mance Rayder, a character in the show, I think? Obviously, if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, we're not going to be able to give you a full backstory on every storyline and every character, but we'll try to give you some of the basics of where and why some of these storylines and characters tie into libertarian ideas, or could if you choose to interpret them that way, as I often do.
when I heard it was coming out, I knew that there were books out already, and I knew people who had read the books, and I asked them about it. And I said, what do you think the show is going to be like? They're like, well, if it's anything like the books, it'll be amazing. And I said, well, basically, what's the theme of the books? And they said, it's like a loose interpretation of the War of the Roses. Mm-hmm. And, being somebody who likes to study, read history, study makes me seem like I'm in the library, but somebody who likes to read history, the War of the Roses was a very interesting time. I've watched other shows that were based on the War of the Roses, and I've watched shows that were actually like the God, I can't remember what that was. The White Queen or something like that. It was a British show. It was based on the War of the Roses, and so it was like, sure, let me check this out and everything. And I was pretty much hooked from the first episode. It seemed like there was. Like it was a society where, especially the people in the North, valued honor, and it just I got hooked pretty quick. What really attracts me and keeps me watching shows are the characters. So I think there are some amazing characters on there. And then the first episode ending with Jamie pushing Bran, a little kid out of a castle window. It's like kind of hard not to come back to that.
I mean, that's one show that did such a great job of ending every episode with a hook or a surprise or a twist that made you. And luckily for me, I was binge watching it, so I actually got to immediately watch the next episode. But it really made it difficult to get anything done during that time period. I almost envy the fact that I couldn't just wait a week in between, because now I couldn't get anything done whatever day that I'm watching it. I had to just continue watching it. It really did suck me in. Why don't you explain the character of Mance Rayder a little bit and why you chose that moniker initially?
Well, Mance Rayder was he used to be the head of the Night's Watch, and then he left and went to be with the Free Folks. And even though the Free Folk were, violent people, there are, if you in the books you see that they'll go to the other side of the wall and they'll attack a village, things like that. I just thought the character of Mance Rayder made the most sense to me, probably the one I identified the most with. I thought it was really interesting that when I was at Liberty Forum in New Hampshire speaking in February, that I was on stage and at the end I took questions, and somebody actually used their time to say to me, now you know what happens to Mance Rayder, right? And I'm like, you mean he died for his principles? Do you have a problem with that in this libertarian audience?
That's a great response.
I didn't say that.
Oh,
because
that's a great response to me now anyway.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to be an asshole at that time, but I don't even remember what I said. I mean, the video hasn't come out yet, and I don't remember what I said.
Not only did he stand up for his principles, but he was willing to literally be burned alive for them.
Yeah, and apparently that's, I guess to some libertarians that's just fun. It's humorous. It's humorous to be willing to die for your principles. I've had a lot of problems with some of the stuff I've seen some quote unquote libertarians and even anarchists saying lately. So I'm not going to get started.
There's many a rant. Maybe we're going to do a little bonus show afterwards. So maybe we can set you off on one of those tangents at that point. But I mean, and also when we talk about libertarian characters, I want to go through some of the characters that we think are sort of, I would say, have libertarian tendencies or libertarian qualities, because we have to remember, especially for people that haven't seen the show, this is a feudal world, a system of kings and queens, and every character that we're talking about operates in that system in some way, shape, or form. Some of them rebel against it, of course, but for the most part, I mean, there's no such thing as libertarianism in this world. There's no Murray Rothbard, out there spreading ideas. There's no Lions of Liberty, sadly. This is all, any analysis about the quote-unquote libertarianism of it is really just, I think, through our lens. I think many people won't see it through the same lens. I have no doubt that George R. Martin is probably not a libertarian, although, I don't really know his political beliefs. I'm just kind of guessing that he's not putting out a secret libertarian sort of creed here, but there are definitely themes that you can pull out and characters that you can pull out. Obviously, Mance Rayder sticks out as one. Just like you said, he's someone that he refused to bend the knee. He was told to bend the knee. I mean, he was even given what you might consider a pretty great deal by Stannis Baratheon, considering they were essentially defeated by his army and had really no way to defeat his army. And he said, the deal sounds great. You know, you're going to let us live here. They gave him an area of land they could live in. But all you have to do is bend your knee and respect me as your king. And Mance Rayder said, no, I won't do that. And he said, all you have to do is just literally just bend your knee and you get everything you want. Everything you can live on the other side of the wall, which is really the whole point of the free folk at that point. They really just wanted to be on the other side of the wall and away from the Night Walkers and to be a part of society or their own part of society, I guess I should say. They were given everything. And Mance Rayder refused to the point that he literally just was burned alive for his beliefs until, thankfully, Jon Snow ended his life a little bit early. But
well, you know what happens in the book, right?
No.
Mance isn't burned alive. Melisandre, I can't remember the character's name. Rattleshirt does a spell and makes Rattleshirt look like Mance, so they think they're killing Mance, but they're actually not. And actually, the very last thing in the very last book that George R.R. Martin wrote, Mance is in a really bad place. He's in a Bolton prison.
Oh, that's not where you want to be.
Yeah. So,
if
but we don't. Like
the Bolton we know.
Yeah, but we don't know where he's at until what's going on with him until George puts out the next book.
Well, that's good. That's good for. I'd like to read the book someday, and it's good to know that there's hope for old Mance in that one. But I'm curious, Pete, who stands out to you? Again, in the context of this sort of feudal society that everyone lives in, who stands out to you besides Mance Rayder as the most libertarian character or characters? Is there anyone that kind of sticks out in your mind?
I think Tyrion is pretty obvious.
He was top of my list
to look at. I mean, he's an academic. He loves to read. He loves to drink. Loves to do other things.
He likes to visit brothels and participate. And he's
not saying that
drinks
that's
and knows things.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's what all libertarians do, but that is definitely the stereo. People will throw that stereotype.
He does live some of the stereotype. And to be fair, I don't think the women in the Game of Thrones brothels are necessarily all there voluntarily, so I wouldn't call them libertarian brothels, to be clear.
Correct, but when you look at someone like Tyrion, I mean, obviously he's not going to initiate force. I mean, he was the hero of what the hell?
Battle of Blackwater.
The Battle of Blackwater, and that was just he knew that he was going to have to defend, and he did. And what's even worse, I mean, in the show, he basically gets a slash in the face. In the book, he loses his nose. Ooh. So basically, he's a goblin after that. But yeah, Tyrion is, I think, probably the most obvious one if you were to look, and you're going to do any better than Tyrion.
He's a really interesting character because he grew up in a sense, he's part of the establishment. He grew up in, one of the most noble families, wealthiest families, the Lannisters. But at the same time, he's an imp. He's a dwarf. His father calls him a bastard, even though he is his son. And, he's very disrespected and not seen as someone who could ever arise to any sort of position of prestige within that society outside of just, being a member of the family and, getting the benefits of that. But he's someone who is placed in positions of power and never, ever abused that power. In fact, he really is someone who tried to be as fair as possible. And I would say he probably advocated, he didn't advocate verbally in the way we would, but he probably practiced the non-aggression principle as well as you could in that sort of system. Now, he did at one point kill his ex-girlfriend, but in fairness, she had betrayed him and was sleeping with her father. It's a very complicated story, but overall, he's a character who always did the right thing. He defended Sansa when she was being abused by King Joffrey, and that's a risky thing to do, even when he was the hand of the king and had a lot of power. He literally, ended the abuse from the king of a young girl. And that is something he often did, that kind of thing. He would often stand up for what was right, regardless of knowing that he would face very poor consequences of it, as he did in the final episode, where after Daenerys had burned the entire city of King's Landing, and she called him out for betraying her, which he technically did by freeing his brother Jaime, and his response to her was, "Yes, I freed my brother, and you just burned an entire city." And then he resigned his position, knowing that he would be sent into the gulag and eventually killed, which he was not. But that was definitely a reasonable fate that he had to expect from doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny that that him bringing up her burning the city and she bringing up betrayal. It's just like, the conversations we see online when somebody's like, "Oh, you misgendered somebody. Oh, it's like you're defending a system that's killed millions of people in the Middle East." It's like, what's more important here? Yeah.
It's very much the same kind of arguments libertarians end up making. Like you said, when we see these silly arguments between Republicans and Democrats, and here we are just thinking both of these people are literally not just advocating, but participating in murder and genocide around the globe right now. And we're arguing about the littlest, tiniest details of some, obscure domestic policy here and there. And you guys aren't seeing the bigger picture where this entire system is destructive. I don't know if Tyrion necessarily sees that big picture, but there's definitely a corollary to how libertarians will try to point out the bigger atrocities that are going out there and sort of prioritize those over, a little issue here or there, many issues of which wouldn't be issues if we didn't have this giant centralized system.
Yeah. That's I think Tyrion was throughout the whole show, he seemed to be the voice of reason and the conscience of the show. I mean, even more so than Sam. Sam seemed to be like that sometimes, but Tyrion more so because, it's really a main character. So, but he seemed to be the one who was constantly trying to bring people back to reality.
Right. And again, another corollary to us libertarians who are always trying to say, don't you just see this is the way things are? And then we're mocked and ridiculed. And the more we talk about it, the more I really do see Tyrion overall as probably an unintentional corollary to libertarianism, just even from the fact that if you look at him on the surface, he looks ridiculous, doesn't look, he's a tiny man. He doesn't look like someone that you would take seriously, that would end up giving amazing, passionate speeches and be able to win people over with his words. I mean, that was the way Tyrion operated. Everything he did, everything he accomplished was essentially because he was very good at words. He was very good at telling stories. And he always said, and this is somewhat of a corollary to American politics, I guess, too, that, whoever wins the Game of Thrones is whoever tells the best stories. And that is actually how politics operates. I mean, that is how the president is chosen in a sense. Well, I mean, we can go into how presidents are quote unquote chosen, but when it comes to actual elections and what sways people, I mean, Donald Trump essentially told the best story. He told the best story of how, he saw the problems in America and he connected with the right amount of people in the right places that got him the right votes. It's basically the same idea. Whoever wins that Game of Thrones is whoever can tell the best stories and convince those around him to do whatever to get them in power. Sometimes that whatever is, murder and poison and treason in this society. But I mean, I think he is as close to a libertarian character as you can get in this show. The next guy on my list of libertarian characters to discuss is probably a pretty obvious one. Essentially, who I think is probably considered the main character. You can make a strong argument that Tyrion is as well, but that is, of course, Jon Snow. And I know he's the popular one. He's the handsome one. He's the one that is all too easy to like, but there's for good reason, because he's one of the. This past season, I didn't really like how Jon Snow was written a lot of the time, because he kind of became meek under Daenerys a little bit, and but at the end he ended up redeeming himself, and I think realizing that he was being too weak and not strong enough, not standing up for his principles the way he needed to, and of course he eventually did by stabbing her through the chest with a sword. Again, there are spoilers here, so I really hope you people have seen, either don't care about the show or have already seen it. But what do you think of Jon Snow and his libertarian cred, so to speak?
Well, from watching the ending of the episode, it looks like Jon Snow's the new Mance Rayder.
Exactly.
Which is pretty cool. Like, I may have been the first one to point that out. I don't know. I was pretty proud of going, he's going to be with the free folks. And what's funny is he was head of the Night's Watch at one time too. So it's like the correlations there are great.
Oh, it's almost an exact parallel in many ways.
Yeah. All right, John. I mean, the show starts out and he's supposed to be like 15, 16 years old.
I thought he was so lame in that first season. Before you actually I really thought all the Star Kids were lame when the show first started. I'm like, oh, here's a bunch of noble kids, shooting bows and arrows, big deal. But they really make you care about each and every one of them, especially John, as things go on.
He seemed to change after he had that conversation up on the wall at Castle Black and he realized that Mance Rayder was Targaryen.
Right.
Is like, it seemed like his whole character changed at that point. Like he realized he like saw the real world for what it was. But I mean, John's not somebody who's going to initiate force. I mean, he's a fighter, he's a warrior, obviously, but he's not going to initiate force against anybody, especially for political purposes, because he has no political aspirations.
The closest you could say he ever came is when he was Lord Commander of the Night Watch, and some people just wouldn't go along with his orders after he was made commander, and he chopped their heads off. But that was very within the context of the code and you might even call it a contract that you have with the Night's Watch about how things are going to operate. Yeah,
and then when he died, and he came back. He basically had that whole attitude of that's it. I'm done. I've fulfilled what I needed to fulfill, and I'm out of here.
Yep. It says you're supposed to be in the Night's Watch till you die. He died, and there was no contract clause about what happens if you come back. So
yeah. So yeah, and he's another one. Always wanted to do the right thing, and he never seemed to be. And there's a lot of characters who want to do the right thing, and they saw the right thing as being evil. He never, in my estimation, he never saw anything that he wanted to do as evil, and it doesn't seem like anything he wanted to do was evil. So yeah, definitely seemed to be I don't know, maybe not on the level of Tyrion, because Tyrion is just so much more intelligent.
Tyrion is almost smart Jon Snow.
Yeah.
In a way. I mean, they have similar morality, I think. But Tyrion also understands the system and knows how to play within it and is more than willing to play within it to achieve whatever he sees as the right ends, whereas Jon Snow will often do what might seem as the quote-unquote dumb thing just because he will just stick to his principles and do the right thing in any circumstance without really thinking it through necessarily.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Jon is the next logical pick. After that, it gets...
After that, it gets messier for sure.
Yeah, trying to find libertarians now. I mean, there's a group in there that I don't know.
Talk about the wildlings overall. I don't know if that's who you're even referring to. But.
Actually, I was thinking of the Brotherhood Without Banners.
Oh, okay.
Berick's group, and I can't remember the name of the other brothers in that, but Berick, the one who had been brought back to life like 7 times,
right?
Brought back from the dead like 7 times. They basically were this group that was, how every house has a banner and a sigil. He's like, I don't want any part of that. They're like, I don't want any part of that.
They're almost like the wildlings that operated within the kingdom in a way. They're just not going to be a part of it, but they were a little more a part of it.
And they were. I would maybe consider them to be, well, I won't call them agorists, because if we want to, I think there's a perfect example of an agorist. But Brotherhood Without Banners just basically, look, we just want to be left alone. And that's not 100% libertarian. I don't think they could really explain why. But there is some sense of, look, we just leave us alone kind of thing.
Well, they literally sold Gentry to Melisandre, so we probably can't call him a libertarian. But
yeah, well, that is pretty agorist. So
I guess it is agorist. You could say that. I mean, definitely those guys, and the wildlings, for obvious reasons, are sort of libertarian, even though they did, raid the occasional village. You do what you got to do in a Game of Thrones world. You got to do what you got to do in Westeros. I'm curious about your thoughts on Arya. What are your thoughts on Arya through a libertarian lens? She did train to become an assassin, but most of her kills, you could pretty much say, were in self-defense or, against the right people. you could say.
Yeah, I know. It's that one seems like a tough one because I guess you can make the argument that she would, I don't know, somebody who's just, she almost seems too eager at points to kill people.
Yeah.
And I think a libertarian would struggle with that, especially even if it was, I mean, I don't know if a libertarian, I don't know, even know if, I think that people like Bob Murphy and even Walter Block would argue that the death penalty is probably not I definitely Bob Murphy would say is not a libertarian act at all.
Right.
So yeah, that's a tough one with me.
I mean, there's certain things she did, like when she killed the Night King, you can definitely say that's some libertarian self-defense in action right there. They're in the process of destroying their whole, not only just the North, but the world. So that's easily self-defense. Littlefinger was given a very swift trial. I'd say like a 3-sentence trial. Give him about 1 minute to defend himself. Now he was a terrible person and did bad things, but she pretty much summarily executed him. So I don't know how libertarian we would call that, despite how much we might think he, a character like that might quote unquote deserve it.
Yeah, I think I think there's a lot of agorism in Game of Thrones, and I don't think that there's any better example than Bronn.
Ooh, Bronn, yeah.
Bronn is just, I mean,
tell us about Bronn a little bit for those that aren't aware.
Yeah, Bronn is just basically he was hired to, when Jaime lost his hand, he was hired to, work with Jaime so that Jaime could become proficient fighting again with just one hand. And he just basically ended up becoming a merc and, Bronn of the Blackwater. And he wasn't going to fight at all unless he was getting paid. And I think in the ultimate irony, he ended up the Lord of Coin. I mean, he would never do anything if he wasn't getting paid, and he ended up to be basically the Secretary of the Treasury. I think that's hilarious to me.
It's pretty funny. And I mean, he was a merc for hire, but we have to assume he did a lot of, unscrupulous things throughout his career. But as far as the character we saw in Game of Thrones, even though you might call him a little bit seedy and such, he was generally pretty honorable in how he operated with the characters we saw. He was extremely loyal to Tyrion, again, because he was getting paid, and extremely, I guess he wasn't necessarily loyal. He wasn't loyal to anyone but money, but he had a certain sense of honor within how he operated, and he was always willing to give someone the chance to make a counteroffer.
Well, if you remember when they were going to show in the previous season, they were going to show Cersei the White Walker, and he walks up there. Tyrion walks up there and he sees Bronn, and then they start going back and forth, insulting each other, and then at the end he's like, "It's good to see you, friend." And he's like, likewise. Mm-hmm. Bronn, the one of the funniest, one of my favorite scenes of the final season is when Bronn finally catches up to Jaime and Tyrion in the North, and he's basically been sent there to kill them, and and the speech he just gives and delivers, you have to go back and watch it. It's some of the funniest stuff. He really given some of the funniest lines there, and just the look on his face. He's just like, he looks like he's half drunk and just half enraged. This is hilarious.
There's a couple more characters, minor characters, I just want to touch on real quick. There's literally probably over 100 nameable characters in this show, so there's no way we could possibly analyze and break down them all.
And there's a lot more in the book.
I'm sure.
So yeah, a lot of the characters in the TV show are just basically amalgamations of 3 and 4 other characters.
Yeah. But one guy I'm curious about, this is someone who definitely evolved in the eyes of the viewer over the years. That is Sandor Clegane, known as the Hound. What are your thoughts on old Sandor?
Yeah, he's this raging psychopath.
He's a raging psychopath for sure. But he was you can kind of understand, that when he was very young, he had his face put into the fire, and that's probably not the best way to start things off from a psychological perspective. But he is a character that, when we first get to know him, he's just straight up working for the King Robert Baratheon, and he is one of the Knights Guard or what have you, and he will carry out orders. But at some point, I think towards the end of season 2, he's also very afraid of fire. Due to being thrown into the fire by his brother, the Mountain, when he was young. But he does, I think it was the end of season 2, where he basically gives up the lifestyle, in a sense, or tries to anyway, of battling for other people. And he says, I'm just going to go live on my own and get out of all this, and ends up kind of teaming up with Arya. And they sort of become BFFs throughout the show, or they have a kind of a love-hate relationship, you could say. But I think by the end of the show, or maybe not towards the very end, since he does end the show in a literal death battle with his brother, but there is a point in the show where he kind of teams up. He was left for dead by Arya after he got into a huge battle with Brienne and was basically considered dead. But in that meantime, we find out that he joined this sect. I think it was called the Seven or something like that.
Yeah. But he also hooked up with the Brotherhood Without Banners for a while.
Yes, that's right. He rode with them for a bit. So he's kind of, I guess he's dabbled in libertarianism, you might say.
He never seemed like he wasn't going to go into a town and just start killing people.
Right, exactly.
It was always, he always seemed to be, when he got violent, it was in self-defense. Except with his brother. And I know the fall killed him, but I think there was a certain irony into the fact that he fell into fire too.
Yeah, for sure. I did love that scene, even though the entire battle between the Hound and the Mountain was completely contrived just because it was something fans wanted. It was just cool. It just looked cool. It was visually cool. The Hound or the Mountain looked like a Darth Vader when Luke ripped his helmet off, and it was just ridiculous and awesome.
Yeah, it was. I was happy with that. I wasn't disappointed at all.
One more character I want to talk about, and it's not necessarily one of the main characters, but he's been an important character throughout the show, and that's Varys. And when the show first came out, I saw him almost as the same as Littlefinger, because they are similar in many ways. They're both characters who in many ways manipulate people around them, and I think as the show goes on, you realize more and more that while they might have similar methods to some extent, Littlefinger is only out for one thing, as he eventually does state. He states many times he has always pictured himself on the Iron Throne. Every single little thing and manipulation he does is so he can try to get on the Iron Throne. Whereas Varys has no desires to be king. He has no desires to see any one king or the other, but he does want what is quote unquote best for the realm. Now you could take this a few ways. If you want to imagine Varys as a libertarian, he just wants the least tyrannical king, or you can just imagine that he's a progressive who has his own vision of the world, and whatever his king he thinks is best. You could really interpret him a few ways, but I'm kind of wondering what your thoughts are on him and how his character developed over the seasons.
Well, obviously, when he was first introduced, he was to be introduced as a villain. He was to be presented as a villain, somebody who had, ears everywhere and knew everything that was going on. Obviously, we get to find out that he became more loyal to Tyrion, helped Tyrion escape after Tyrion killed his dad, and Varys basically probably delivered the most libertarian line of the whole series when he said, maybe the best person to rule is somebody who doesn't want to.
Mm-hmm. And he does end up getting that in a sense. It's not the person he had in mind.
Yeah. And his demise was just awful. Although I don't know how much he would have suffered. But yeah, I mean,
being burned by dragonfire doesn't sound fun. I don't know how, I like to think it doesn't take long, but it still doesn't seem like the way to go.
I would hope it would be like instantaneous, but who knows? But and also, after that, then Tyrion just realized that was like the straw where Tyrion was just like, okay, this is probably not going to work out at all.
Yeah, and again, going back to Tyrion, how many times did he try to temper Daenerys and convince her, at the very least, just when the bells ring and they surrender, at least stop then. Because he knew she was going in there guns blazing with the dragon and just ready to tear things down. And I think the character of Daenerys is an interesting progression, but I think many people are almost forgetting that she was almost always a tyrant from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And the only reason she never went full tyrant had always been because of the advisors around her, whether it was Jorah Mormont or Missandei or eventually Tyrion and Varys. They were always basically talking her down from the ledge. From the very beginning of the show, she was saying she was going to take that throne with fire and blood. In her mind, she was going to be a liberator in doing so, but that was a consistent trait of her character. So I think a lot of the criticism you see out there of it being a flip, and I think that last season was rushed a bit, so it might have seemed like more of a flip than it would have if they had fleshed it out a little more, but really it was entirely consistent with her character. And the second that last voice of reason, those few last voices of reason were all gone. I mean, within the span of 2 episodes, you lost Jorah Mormont, she saw Missandei get killed, she no longer trusted Tyrion, and she murdered Varys herself. So suddenly everyone reasonable around her was either dead or someone she wasn't listening to anymore. So it almost only made sense for her to finally go too far and mass murder civilians, as she did in one of the last couple episodes, or I think that was the penultimate episode.
Let me just point out that Daenerys was always talking about, I want to save people and everything. And there's that Mencken quote where the urge to save humanity is always, I can't remember what it is, but the urge to save humanity is usually always a mask for wanting to rule it.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it's because I'm breaker of chains and bringing people out of slavery. And I mean, yeah, I brought a bunch of people out of slavery, just burned them. Just psychopath.
Yeah, well, that's funny. There's, kind of like you're saying there is the part of that last episode where Jon is still giving her one last chance to just become reasonable and say, okay, well, now that this is over, let's just not go burning cities anymore. And she basically says, no, I'm definitely going to be doing this some more. And she said, well, what if people don't want to be freed? Because she still sees herself as a liberator, even no matter how many people she kills along the way. And she said, well, they have no choice. And that was the moment when, you could see that Jon Snow knew he had to kill her, gave her that last kiss and stabbed her through the chest. So, but I'm curious what you thought as someone who's been with this for 10 years almost now. For me, it's a 6-week journey and it's been a wild ride, but for you've been around for so long. I'm curious how you thought about the last episode, or maybe just the last season overall, because I know a lot of longtime fans of the show who just don't like how everything played out.
Well, I think probably the most important part of that whole show is the last episode was what happened in the throne room. I like the way they shot it, where you didn't know who stabbed who.
Yeah.
For a second, it's like, okay, who's stabbing who? And obviously it was going to be Jon stabbing Daenerys, but it would have been, if George R.R. Martin was writing, it might have been the other way around. But we have to deal with those 2 jagoffs who now are probably going to go and destroy Star Wars. But yeah, I mean, he saw what he had to do. I think the part that I really loved was when Drogon just basically melted down the throne.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and
it's a little bit of a logical stretch because you have to think, did Drogon really understand, the politics and the symbolism? But
yes,
maybe he does.
Yes. Tyrion had said, I can't remember when it was, that dragons were really smart. And
so I must have missed that.
Yeah, and if you remember one time, Tyrion made a joke, said something about, as long as a dragon doesn't eat me, and Drogon laughed.
Oh, huh.
Yeah, they're exceptionally smart. I wanted to find out if Jon could be burned because he's a Targaryen, and Daenerys is the unburned. I wanted to see if Jon could be burned, but basically the melting down of the throne. And my wife points it out on the introduction when they do that really cool introduction with almost looks like claymation sometimes.
Yeah.
When it came to the Iron Throne, the first 5 episodes, you saw the sigil of the house of Lannister above it, and at this last one, there was none. It was blank. And what's funny is it ended up being blank because no family took over. So, that's rather interesting.
And
But,
I'm curious, what do you think about the choice of just kind of installing Bran as king? And it was kind of a funny road to get there, because along the way there was a moment where I thought they were going to go a certain direction. I'm sure you had some thoughts at the time when Sam gets up and they're talking about how they're going to choose their leaders, and Sam gets up and says, "Well, what if everybody got to choose?" And he basically tries to invent democracy. And
Yeah.
I totally thought they were just going to go with that, and then he basically gets laughed down, and they just sit him right back down and move on.
Yeah, that was I'm like, oh no, please don't do this. Oh no, and then everybody started laughing. I'm like, phew.
Yeah, I don't think my coworkers understood why I found that so funny, because we didn't. But I just like I laughed. That was a real laugh out loud moment for me during that show.
Well, I have to say this, and I have the receipts to prove it. I've been asked on numerous podcasts that I've been on, and on my own show a couple times, who I thought would end up on the throne. And I always said, I really don't know who would end up on the throne. But if it were me and I were to choose someone, it would be Bran. And I mean, I called this one because I said, if I'm going to have a king, I want it to be somebody who's not thinking about themselves, somebody who can see the future, see the past, and somebody basically who, is going to be benevolent. And, the three-eyed raven is the picture of benevolence. And, of course, some people have said, if he can see the future and he can see the past, he could have stopped, King's Landing from being burned to the ground and everything. So actually, I saw someone making the argument today that he's an evil monster because, he knew that was going to happen and everything, and he allowed it to happen. But, I mean,
I don't know if three-eyed raven powers work exactly that way, though, because it's not like he's not benevolent. He has to sort of search for things. Even when he was looking, when Sam mentioned that, the whole thing with Jon being Aegon Targaryen,
right.
Bran didn't already know that. He had to go, warg into that specific time and see it, and then he knew it. So I don't think he has a complete knowledge of the past, present, and future, especially the future. And they never really make it clear that he can actually just literally just see what happens in the future. There is one interesting element to that whole thing, though. There's I think it was in the season right before the battle with the Night King and the White Walkers. There's a scene where Bran and Tyrion basically is like, "Hey, what's up? Let's talk." And they cut away, and they never explain what happened there. And in my fan fiction, that's where they not necessarily concoct this plan. I don't think it's necessarily a plan in that way, but I think there is some way where Bran and Tyrion had an understanding. I don't know if it's like in the sense of how exactly things were going to play out, but that basically things would end up where they were. And if you think about it, Tyrion won the Game of Thrones, essentially. If we're talking about the actual people who were playing it in a way, he's the king for all intents and purposes. Bran is the figurehead, but, in that one scene with the council, Bran's basically like, all right, I'm going to go warg out and look for Drogon. You guys do ruling stuff. And then Tyrion's in charge. So it's, in a way, he sort of did win the Game of Thrones.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you have to have a king, Tyrion wouldn't be so bad.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I still think, when you know the history of the three-eyed raven and everything, the three-eyed raven is not in it for himself, so it's, I was happy with that part of it. I don't know. I wasn't as upset with this as everybody else seemed to be. I think that people just have way too much invested in their entertainment sometimes, I
spent a week or two fan theorizing. I imagine if I spent years doing it, I might be more upset when my theories didn't play out exactly as I thought. Yeah.
I mean, I liked the last episode, the last season of Lost, and I liked the last episode of Lost, and same thing with Fringe. And, I wasn't particularly a fan of like the last episode of Breaking Bad. I just thought it was too predictable. That's what was going to happen. I mean, most of us who talked about that show had figured out that something like that was going to happen.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I didn't have a problem with it. It really needs to be about 10 episodes though.
Yeah, that's my biggest complaint. I don't have an issue with any of the events that occurred in the last season. It just and D&D, as I believe that people call them now, they basically said, yeah, we're sick of doing the show. We wanted to get done. So, and I think they were actually offered to do 10 episodes or even 8. And they said, no, we can do it in 6. So, and yeah, some of them were longer. You could say it even adds up time-wise to a 10-episode season, but, things are just paced differently when they're by episode. And it could have used a little more fleshing out, especially with how those first few seasons, there was just so much character development, and it was, it was over so much time that it was really effective, whereas a lot of this character development, even though to me it is all logical within the context of the story, it just was very, very rushed. You could have used at least 2 more episodes, I'd say, but that's a minor complaint in the grand scheme of things to me.
Yeah, I wish they would have, like, at the Battle of the Night King, I wish they would have killed a couple, at that point, killed a couple of the main characters. Instead of having a bunch of the main characters, them all at the attack on King's Landing. It's just stuff that I would have.
Although there was that one scene where Tyrion, and this could tie into that scene with Bran as well. But when they're all drinking right before that battle, right before the Long Night battle, and Tyrion just starts laughing. He's like, you know what? I kind of think we're all going to live. And every single person in that room lived, not to the end of the show. They all did live through that battle. It was Jaime and Brienne and Davos and Podrick and Thormund. Every single one of them that did live through that.
Yeah, that was
kind
pretty
of
cool.
Interesting. There's just so many little tidbits in that show. But, I could go on about this show all day. I do want to get just your final thoughts on the entirety of Game of Thrones through a libertarian perspective. Do you think that there are really libertarian themes that are in this show, or are people like you and me just going to see what we want to see? Do you think George R.R. Martin has any libertarian tendencies that he was intentionally trying to inject into his books and also the show?
Well, in order for me to say George R.R. Martin, I'd have to
you have to warg into his mind like Bran.
Well, I'd have to leave out the last season because he didn't have anything to do with it.
Well, yeah, I think he actually, his book and the book stopped by the 4th season, I believe, and then he basically told them how it was going to end, and they sort of did it their own way.
Yeah, but nothing that I really see. I mean, I think we're reading a lot into it.
Sure.
In a monarchical society, being a libertarian is probably one of the most dangerous things that you could do, So, I just didn't. I saw it because I can find libertarian themes in anything, But
yeah, absolutely,
So, but if you say that, we think Tyrion is the most libertarian character, well, you can point out tons of stuff that he did that wasn't libertarian at all. So,
for sure.
I think George R.R. Martin is just a good old fashioned statist, like most people, and but he put out a good product, and it's entertaining, and it helps people to forget about all the crap that's going on around them.
And it gives us podcast content. So
yes,
give him credit for that.
Yes.
Well, Pete, it's been a blast talking to you as always. And I think you're going to stick around. We're going to do a little Patreon segment that will be available for anyone who supports Lions of Liberty on Patreon, or who supports Free Man Beyond the Wall on Patreon. Why don't I just let you take a quick second and give everyone out there the full roundup. Of course, everyone familiar with this show gets to hear my little ad read for you every single week here. But I want you to let everybody know where they can find your show and anything else you got coming up in the works. I believe you're involved in a little documentary as well that's coming up.
Yeah. Free Man Beyond the Wall podcast. All the podcatchers, iTunes, Stitcher, anything you can find there. It's freemanbeyondthewall.com. By the time this comes out, I will have released an episode with G. Edward Griffin, which everybody should check out because
he's one of my very first guests on the show. He is awesome.
Yeah, he's a legend. Every libertarian. Ron Paul talks about Creature from Jekyll Island. So, yep. So yeah, podcast, and I'm working on myself and 2 people are working on a documentary where we're going to look at the whole history of government up until now. And then we're going to basically talk about what it would be like transitioning to a stateless society and what a stateless society would look like. And, we've done a few interviews Vitt, the president of Liberland. I think we interviewed Thaddeus Russell. We interviewed Eric July. It was all basically almost everything happened at Anarchapulco this year. But we're getting ready to have a bunch more interviews, and especially with Mises University coming up in July. So we're hoping to have it out by the end of the year. Of course, that there's no way that's going to happen. So I would be looking at next summer for a release, and we're looking at, of course, Amazon Video, Netflix, everything should be
awesome.
Should be a good one. Hour, looking at an hour and a half to hour and 45 minutes.
It sounds like something that's much needed, because I think libertarians are awesome at the logic, the reason, not so much the marketing sometimes, and not so much, I think one of the hardest things even for me to discuss is, how we get from here to there, because that, we can have a grand vision for how things would be better, but that's what people always say. Well, how are you going to get there? How are you going to get there? So I'm glad that's something that you are taking the time out to address in a format that can hopefully reach a lot more people.
Yeah, we just had to learn to relax and say, okay, it's gonna happen in its own time. When the whole thing is going to be based on interviews, tracking people down is the definitely the hardest part. So it will happen. We're constantly in contact and constantly writing and setting things up. But right now, I'm probably thinking next summer.
Cool. Well, we'll definitely have you back on, probably even before that, of course. But, we'll have you back on when that comes out for sure to get the word out.
All right.
All right, Pete, it's been a blast talking to you. And again, if you want to hear a little more from me and Pete here, well, support at least one of us on Patreon. Hopefully you support both of us. That's the ideal. But you can support Lions of Liberty or Free Man Beyond the Wall on Patreon and get to hear a little bonus segment where we'll be taking questions from our supporters. Thanks a lot, Pete. I'll talk to you soon.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with the great Pete Raymond. Be sure to check out, once again, Free Man Beyond the Wall. This guy pumps them out 3 days a week. Very, very impressive. As soon as you're done with your Lions of Liberty, of course, click on over to Pete every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. What a great double whammy there. 3 days a week. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you get a double dose of great libertarian content. And Pete did stick around after the show. We did a pretty extensive Ask Me Anything, taking questions from both our Patreon supporters. So Pete took some questions from the Lions of Liberty Pride, and I took some questions from listeners and supporters of Free Man Beyond the Wall. So we had a blast with that one. Again, check out our Patreon. Please head over to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. For as little as $5 a month, you can engage with all this extra bonus content and know that you're helping us grow this show. And send us to PorkFest, where we'll be going at the end of the month, put on by our friends at the Free State Project and our good friend Roger Paxson of the Lava Flow podcast. If you are heading to PorkFest, check us out. We'll be doing a number of podcasts. We'll be doing a live read of Brian McWilliams' special Do Nothing Man. If you're not familiar with that, well, you need to join the Lions of Liberty Pride. That is where those exclusive episodes are released for our great supporters. But there was a free one released. I will try to link to that one in today's show notes so you can check it out if you weren't able to do that. Again, today's show notes will be found at lionsofliberty.com/402. And hey, there are many ways to help us out. Even if you don't want to toss us a couple ducats every month, you can share this program, tell a friend about it, post it on social media, retweet it, comment, like. All of this stuff helps us out. And of course, those 5-star ratings and excellent reviews on iTunes are always huge. So any way you can help us out, we really do appreciate it. Even if it's just tuning in 3 days a week or even once a week. Heck, not everybody has time to listen to everything. I get how that is. But you really should listen to us first. That's all I got, my friends. Until Wednesday with Brian McWilliams. Until Friday with John Odermatt. And until next week, that's when I'll see you next. And I only have one more request of you, and that is to live long and live free.